I would like to introduce our next speaker, Tai Shimabukuro, who will be sharing about the coral species Montipora capitata.
Okay. Oh. Hello, my name is Tai Shimabukuro. I'm a undergraduate marine science student, and today I will be sharing my project of growth rate and form of Montipora capitata under branching coral cultivation techniques. So just as a starter, coral reefs occur in sunny, nutrient-poor waters, and hermatypic corals, sclerotignate corals, produce calcium carbonate skeletons that are an essential part of the ecosystem. These ecosystems are very important as they supply about 33% of the marine life in the world, and that marine life feeds about 500 million people globally. It is a source of numerous medicinal compounds, and it produces the wave energy that affects global shorelines. So sclerotignate corals are a primary producer. They photosynthesize, but they're animals. So they actually do have variable growth rates compared to plants. So for example, these are Montipora capitata. So we got branching, plating, right next to each other. So unfortunately, corals are undergoing a global decline. They face threats such as coral bleaching, increased ocean temperatures, the increase of atmospheric carbon, which affects their ability to absorb calcium carbonate, and they are threatened by pollution, diseases, and development. So methods of saving corals. So the primary method of saving corals is coral fragmentation. Coral fragmentation is the asexual reproduction of corals by basically breaking off a piece from a mother colony and letting it grow into a new coral colony. These corals are genetically identical to their parents, which is a good way to preserve genetic diversity, and these corals can either be outplanted as soon as possible or they can be stored. So Hawaiian coral restoration is a bit different from the rest of the world. Our corals only reproduce at about 1 to 2 centimeters per year. This is compared to other corals around the world, such as the South Pacific and in the Caribbean, where corals grow at a rate of about 10 to 20 centimeters per year. This is mostly acropora corals and other fast-growing species, which don't really occur in Hawaii, but it is the reason why Hawaii needs to develop some new techniques. One of these new techniques is a new pillar reflector technique developed by Hawaii DAR. So this technique has currently only been really utilized for growing branching species such as Poecilipora meandrina and Poecilipora grandis. It hasn't been used for other species of coral here in Hawaii, but I think it had potential, so this is why I tested it out. So the coral we tested this with was Montipora capitata. This species was chosen because A, it's indigenous to Hawaii, so it can be used for other parts of the world. It is also a variable growth form coral, so it has variable growth forms depending on the conditions. For example, it can be a pillar, a plate, encrusting, and it can have large or small branches depending on its growth conditions. Certain growth forms of coral can be kind of selected for preferentially in captivity due to the varying growth requirements you can put into a tank. So for example, increased current could lead to increased branching, and increasing the light can lead to smaller branches, while less could lead to a plating form coral. So knowing what will encourage growth for this type of coral that grows into a lot of different types would help for rapid response for coral mortality events such as bleaching or like environmental disasters. So the null hypothesis was that there would be no difference in growth, either by branching growth or by surface area growth. And the objective is to see if a difference in light conditions can expedite growth and branching behavior. Okay. So for the coral growth setup, we utilized the Marine Option Program 568-liter coral tank at PACRAC. It was lit with an Akazu T5 watt HO bulb array. Temperature was kept at 24 to 25.5 degrees Celsius using a chiller. And salinity was maintained at 35 parts per thousand. Calcium was kept at 380 to 400. GH was kept at 180. KH was also 180. pH was kept at 8.5 using a buffer. And NO2 and NO3 were kept at 0 for coral health. So the coral growth modules utilized were made for this experiment. We made 10 pillar modules that were constructed using concrete bricks. DAR's method utilized custom concrete molds, but we didn't really have time or the funding for that. So 5 colonies of coral were collected from Onekahakaha using the UH Hilo Marine Option Program Species Acquisition Permit. Colonies were divided into 8 fragments each, and 4 fragments were attached to each pillar. So the experiment utilized 5 pillars that were placed between 2 laminated mylar reflectors angled at 50 degrees at the coral. These reflected light back at the coral, which is the methodology used by Hawaii DAR. And we had 5 control pillars, which had no reflectors surrounding the coral. This was to see if the additional lighting would increase branching growth, as branching growth is a response to high light hitting the coral. So data was analyzed. Light levels were measured using a LI250A light meter. Corals were photographed bi-monthly from December 15th to April 1st. A photo station was set up using PVC pipes to ensure a consistent photo scale. And images were analyzed in Fiji ImageJ. This is a program that allows you to circle the surface area of these corals to determine the size. Area and growth was compiled in Excel, and statistics were done in Minitab. So the 2 things measured were overall growth comparison, which was a bi-monthly measure of the total surface area of the coral, and branching growth comparison, which was basically a side measurement of the coral. So to the right is the surface area measurement. As you can see, it goes over the top surface area of the coral, and the branching growth measurement is to the left, and it was basically a side view, which allowed us to check the branching without any of the encrusting growth. So the results for the photometer readings, average photometer readings were roughly the same. For the control group, we had a reading of 43.63 micromoles, but there was a very little reflected light coming back up from the bottom, as it was just a bare bottom tank, which was only 2.14 micromoles. The reflector had a slightly lower light reading of 36.07 micromoles. It was a bit to the side of the top lighting. But the reflected light coming up from the mylar reflectors was 11.26 micromoles, which was larger than the bare bottom. So the average overall growth of the corals was not quite what was expected. The corals with no reflectors averaged at about 3.505 square centimeters, whereas the corals with reflectors averaged at about 0.5336 square centimeters. Average branching growth followed a similar trend, with the corals with no reflectors growing at 2.820 square centimeters, and corals with reflectors growing at 1.003 square centimeters. There was no significant difference in either of the coral growths. They tested for normality with the Smirnov test. However, both pair T tests also showed no significant difference in growth. So the corals did not show a significant area or branching growth. We think that was because there was limited tank space. We didn't actually get the desired coral configuration. See how these corals are kind of glued in a stack position? We had originally wanted corals going on each side of the pillar, but we did not have the tank space for it. So we can only stick them side by side and not all together. Future projects would also hopefully utilize fragments of a more standardized size, as the pillar layout did cause a bit of shading. So hopefully we could glue them on sideways instead of jutting outwards. Also, since the corals were not of a standardized size, a 3D photogrammetry tool instead of Image J Fiji would be more appropriate. Image J Fiji was chosen because this is the program that DAR was using and it's what they recommended. However, it was quite difficult to get a standardized measurement of these corals. And I would say that I would have liked to have more time with these corals, as I was only able to measure them for essentially 3 months. But near the end of actually around March 15th, we did notice some stress on the coral pillars. Before that, they were doing really well. And suddenly we had 1 or 2 corals that were just like completely white. We had originally thought that like someone might have like knocked them and I was looking at the broken skeleton, but no, they just bleached. So we need to deal with stress conditions within this tank a bit better. So the broader impact of this study is that we have documentation of captive growth form responses. Now we can possibly use that for other corals, although I would have liked a more successful growth period without the bleaching. This could lead to rapid restoration responses after environmental disasters, such as diseases like we have in Kaneohe Bay, like Montipora white syndrome, and habitat destruction, like that plane that landed in Kaneohe Bay last semester. And potential to replicate with other species is one of the main things we want to do in the future. One species that Hawaii DAR recommended was Poraites rus, which is also another variable growth species. I'd like to acknowledge my thesis advisors, my thesis class advisors, the other people who worked with me on the Marine Option Program Coral Tank, and Samara Newfield, who was our DAR contact, Virginia Bronco, who donated her lamination machine so I can laminate the Mylar. Mahalo. Any questions?
Were your fragments taken from the same mother colony or from separate colonies?
We actually had 5 total mother colonies, but one pillar was, each pillar had like a control pillar and a reflector pillar. Each had like fragments from the same colony. Oh.
Did you see more bleaching on corals that were underneath the reflectors?
Yes. We did see more initial bleaching of corals under the reflectors. We're not entirely sure if that's because there was more light or because the reflectors might have been blocking current flow. Hopefully it wasn't more light. We were having a bit of issues with corals bleaching even before mine started, but before that March 15th bleaching event, they kind of were doing really well in the tank despite all that. Oh.
So I have a related question. So, I mean, could it be that the differences you were seeing weren't an artifact of early death in the corals? And could it be that, like, maybe there is such a thing as too much light for these corals, like too much of a good thing?
I think it is a possibility, although we weren't using the strongest aquarium lights, so we'll have to like check with like other records on that. It's a bit hard because no one else is really growing Hawaiian coral species, so yeah, everyone. Like, I think most of the like bleaching experiments with light are like acroporas, and I think we'd have more data like with aquarium species. But yeah. Okay.
Give him another hand. Thank you so much, Ty, for your presentation. We will be having a short break if you guys want to talk to any of the speakers who just presented. We'll be meeting back at 2:25. The silent auction also will be closing at 2:25. So you guys have like 4 minutes. Do some last minute bidding and checking those papers. Stretch your legs. We're almost done with today. Mahalo you all for attending.
Turn up the camera.